Imagine flying an old Soviet fighter jet into the most dangerous airspace on Earth, alone. No wingman, no backup, just you, your wits, and 4 American-made bombs strapped to a plane never designed to carry them. That's exactly what a Ukrainian MiG-29 pilot pulled off in one of the craziest missions of the war, and the way he did it, absolutely insane. Let's dive into this unbelievable story. It was June 27, 2025. A Ukrainian MiG-29 from the 40th Tactical Aviation Brigade was supposed to be on a routine flight, if you can even call flying into Russian-occupied territory routine. Everything seemed fine until the jet's weapons interface started screaming voltage warnings. This wasn't supposed to happen. The flight was calm so far, but things were about to get very ugly. Suddenly, his radar warning receiver went off. A Russian S-300 radar had just painted him from nearly 95 kilometers away. For a pilot, that sound is a death sentence if you don't act fast. He yanked the stick, dove down to just 500 feet, hugging the ground and using hills and terrain to hide from the enemy's radar. At that altitude, one mistake and you're in the dirt. But staying low was the only way to survive. Meanwhile, his bombs weren't even ready. These weren't standard MiG-29 weapons. Ukrainians had improvised American GBU-39 smart bombs onto old Soviet pylons. To work, each bomb needed to lock onto GPS satellites, calibrated sensors, and talk to the MiG's hacked-together control system. Normally, this takes about 30 seconds, but for our pilot, it dragged on for 2 terrifying minutes. 2 minutes of flying blind, hoping the enemy didn't see him before the bombs went green. Finally, they armed. His iPad, yes, an actual iPad mounted in the cockpit, displayed the target coordinates. The target? A Russian drone factory is over 350 kilometers inside the occupied territory. This place pumped out 40 Shahed-136 kamikaze drones every single week, raining destruction on Ukrainian cities. Stopping this factory wasn't just a military objective, it was about saving civilian lives. But there was a big problem. The Russians weren't dumb. They had a powerful electronic warfare system called the Kushuka-4 near the site, blasting 500 watts of GPS jamming signals. Basically, they were flooding the air with noise to blind any weapon relying on satellite navigation. On top of that, his MiG fuel was limited. After dropping the bombs, he'd have just 18 minutes over enemy territory before running out of fuel. If he got lost or delayed, game over. As he crossed into contested airspace, his threat warning lights lit up like a Christmas tree. S-400 radars locked onto him. SA-15 mobile air defenses started tracking him. The Kushuka's jammer's interference was already bleeding into his systems. Every second in this sky was a gamble. And if that wasn't enough, there was another twist. The bomb's electrical adapters were pulling 32 amps through circuits designed for 20. That meant at any moment, the whole wiring hack job could fry itself. Ukrainian battlefield engineers was literally fighting Soviet electrical standards mid-air. Talk about flying on hope and duct tape. Now, here's where the mission gets truly insane. Ukrainian intelligence had mapped a narrow gap, just 8 kilometers wide, between the overlapping S-300 radar zones. To survive, our pilot had to thread this needle perfectly. 2 kilometers too far left, Russian radar locks onto you. 3 kilometers right, you fly straight into a SA-15 missile battery. And the only reason this gap even existed? The curvature of the Earth and some hills blocked low-altitude radar. The corridor was so tight that he dropped to just 400 feet, scraping over dry riverbeds and power lines that didn't even show up in mission planning photos. One wrong move and there'd be nothing left but wreckage. At this point, a mobile SA-15 stopped moving and switched on his radar, clearly suspecting someone was sneaking through the blind spot. The pilot had no choice but to push even lower. He was now just meters above the ground. His life depended on staying invisible. Then came the moment of truth. To release the bombs, he'd have to climb back up to 15,000 feet, completely exposing himself to every radar and missile in the area. But Ukrainian planners had timed everything perfectly. Su-24 jets had attacked enemy radars earlier, drawing attention elsewhere. Electronic warfare units blasted fake radar signals to make Russians think an attack was coming from the northwest. All of this deception gave our pilot a tiny 90-second window to pop up, launch, and get out. He pulled into a steep climb. Immediately, Russian S-400 radars locked on with 350 watts of power, so intense it could literally heat his jet's nose cone. He had 90 seconds before missiles would reach him. And remember, the Kushuka jammer was still flooding the airwaves, trying to blind his bombs. At 15,000 feet, with fuel gauges screaming, he armed his weapons. Each bomb's GPS receiver started final checks. If GPS failed, the mission would be a disaster. Civilians back home were counting on him to take out those drones. And then it was time. He pressed the pickle button. The first 250-pound bomb dropped. The MiG jolted upward from the weight loss. Within milliseconds, the bomb's GPS got slammed with interference. Russian jammers thought they just blinded it, but the bomb's guidance system had a secret trick. It switched to inertial navigation instantly, flying blind, but with insane accuracy. The Russians had no idea that jamming was useless against American engineering. 6 seconds later, bomb 2 dropped, then 3, then 4. Each one popped out wings mid-air, transforming into a gliding precision missile. Their computers plotted different attack angles so that no single defense gun could stop them all. They'd hit the target in 30-second intervals, like a drumbeat of destruction. The pilot didn't stick around to watch. He rolled his MiG inverted and dove back to the deck, pulling 5 Gs to get as low as possible. Behind him, Russian SA-15 operators finally realized what was happening and fired missiles. But by then, physics had already decided the outcome. Their missiles would never catch him before he disappeared behind terrain. Meanwhile, the bombs kept gliding. Through one of the worst electronic warfare zones on the planet, they held their course with pinpoint accuracy. At 180 meters per second, they flew silently toward the target. And then, the fireworks. The first bomb slammed into the assembly building. It didn't just hit, it penetrated at a steep angle for maximum destruction. The second smashed into the electronics workshop, wiping out all the programming gear needed to make the drones work. Without it, the Shaheds were just oversized model planes. The third hit the warehouse, where 15 to 20 completed drones were waiting. Each carried explosives, triggering a massive chain reaction. The fourth bomb double-tapped what was left, ensuring the entire facility was gone. Russian operators finally realized that jammer had failed, but by then, huge fireballs were rising thousands of feet into the air. The mission had succeeded. But our pilot wasn't safe yet. He still had to escape. He dropped back to 400 feet with barely enough fuel to make it home. Russian SA-15 batteries launched more missiles, and Su-35 fighters scrambled to chase him. But the terrain and his low altitude kept him hidden. The Russian jets simply couldn't get a radar lock on a target flying that low through hills and valleys. By the time they reached his position, he was already too close to friendly airspace. Their long-range missiles were useless without a lock. Minutes later, he crossed back into Ukrainian territory. Behind him, columns of smoke marked the destruction of a factory that had terrorized civilians for months. Post-mission analysis revealed something incredible. Those GPU-39 bombs stayed accurate within 12 meters despite non-stop jamming. Ukrainian engineers had literally strapped 21st century smart bombs onto a Cold War fighter, and it worked. Think about how crazy that is. A 40-year-old Soviet jet, modified with salvaged tank parts, an iPad in the cockpit, and some creative wiring, just took down one of the most heavily protected targets in occupied territory. That's not just innovation, that's desperation turned into brilliance. And this is why this mission will go down as one of the wildest airstrikes of modern warfare. It's not just about bombs and planes, it's about human guts, creativity, and refusing to give up. If you thought this story was insane, you haven't heard the half of what Ukraine's Air Force has pulled off. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell, because we've got more unbelievable missions and insane stories coming up. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's next.